Of course, if you are a hungry young indie director, and you don't get assimilated by one of the big four studios, the alternative is to fade away into utter and complete obscurity. This is a fate worse than death for most of my fame-obsessed fellow Americans, and it can quite easily equal death in our bloodthirsty country, whose overriding ethos of, I've got mine, fuck you, only becomes more apparent with each natural disaster. So if you'll indulge me, I'd like to take some time off from reviewing corporate franchise sci-fi blockbuster films in order to give some mad props to 2013's entirely forgotten Escape from Tomorrow. Because it's either this, or I go back to camping my local grocery store for their next shipment of toilet paper. Writer-director Randy Moore made a pretty nice-sized splash with this picture when it first premiered, and his subsequent disappearance from the movie world just goes to show you that sometimes, even when you win the lottery, you can still lose. And if we're being quite honest, that's not too terribly surprising. This movie's too surreal for most American critics, who only have room in their hearts for David Lynch, and will compare everyone else to him negatively, whether they deserve it or not. Simultaneously, and paradoxically, Escape from Tomorrow is too normal for the surrealists, who have their own storied filmmaking traditions, thank you very much. And they won't even give an idea the time of day unless it stands a chance of scaring the straights. This isn't the first time something like this has happened either. Louis Brunel and Salvador Dali hoped their 1929 film Un Chien Andalou would be so hardcore that it would cause riots in the streets of Paris. And they were apparently quite disappointed when everyone at that premiere nodded politely and said something like, "Yep, that's a Brunel-Dali collab, all right." 4 out of 5. Needs more dream logic, but otherwise, pretty much what I expected. At least Un Chien Andalou went on to become what we would now call a blockbuster. Escape from Tomorrow played the festival circuit and then completely disappeared, to be remembered only by weirdos like me. There's only one scene here that's anywhere near as hardcore as anything Brunel and Dali came up with. But that's almost beside the point. The point is, true surrealist pieces are living dreams, while Escape from Tomorrow is very much a story. And it's the story of how one family's last day at Disney World turns into a waking nightmare, after Patriarch Jim gets a call from his boss first thing in the morning, telling Jim that he's lost his job. Filmed on location at Disney World and Disneyland. All shot in an austere black and white that flattens and distorts space, with few to no special effects required. Which is good, because the few that are here are kinda cheap. So why isn't this movie more well known? For one thing, it's widely mislabeled as a dark comedy, whatever that means. And by widely, I mean that's what the storyline section on the IMDb says, but let's be honest, where are people going to check first? Genres are socially constructed bullshit anyway, but if I have to argue on those terms, I'd argue that Wikipedia does a better job, calling this a psychological horror dark fantasy. Or it did until the inevitable Wikipedia editing drama. And that's why Wikipedia is an unreliable source, kids. Not just because the film's packed with creepy imagery that may or may not be the product of its protagonist's deluded mind, but also because of the shot composition. When scenes are set inside, where the filmmakers obviously have more control, the damn thing's even lit in that classic universal horror movie style that makes everyone look just a little bit more sinister. But of course, as a horror movie, there's only one death at the beginning, one at the end, and a whole lot of jump scares in between. This is the exact opposite of what floats the solipsistic, metric-driven American horror movie critics' boat. It should go without saying that this movie was made without the cooperation or knowledge of the Disney Corporation. There was some concern about the actors showing up in the same clothes and riding the same rides every day, but apparently park security only bugged them once, when they mistook the crew for paparazzo annoying a family of famous tourists. Gotta have priorities, am I right? It is a rare and remarkable thing to see a film open with the "this is a work of fiction" disclaimer. Usually those go at the end, under the logos of the camera companies. We're only Marvel fans looking to get hyped for the next product dare to tread. But, and this is another reason why everyone's forgotten about this movie, too much of the discourse around it got bogged down in the legality of it even existing. Articles about all the shit I just summarized in a paragraph are thick on the ground. Articles about its actual or potential meaning are thinner than topsoil in a dust bowl. Professor Tim Wu of Columbia Law School got a whole New Yorker piece out of this thing's legality. But in the midst of speculating what Disney might do to Randy Moore, with its bottomless pockets and famously vicious lawyers, Professor Wu did offer this one bit of actual criticism. Quote, "The film isn't so much a criticism of Disney World itself, but of the unattainable family perfection promised by a day spent at the park." Unquote. Now, all due respect, Professor, but I gotta say, strong disagree. That unattainable family perfection is itself a product, packaged and sold to us by the Disney Corporation, as old Uncle Walt explicitly intended. The Mouse House got its litigious reputation in part thanks to years of going after anyone who dared to look askance at that product, or at the company's packaging of it. And this film includes plenty of that, even before things get capital W weird. Wife Emily and daughter Sarah managed to fit 3 rides into the time it takes Jim and his son Elliot to get to the front of the line for Buzz Lightyear. And it's a screaming baby line, of course. Like a screaming baby airplane flight, except worse, because when you're 30,000 feet in the air, you have no illusions about your ability to escape the screaming baby. When you're in line for a ride, you can taste freedom. You can see it. It's right over there. But oh no, you don't want to leave. You don't want to give up your place. And as soon as they make it to the front of the line, like clockwork, the ride is declared not in service. Our writer-director claims he was inspired to make all of this by the experience of going to Disney World as a kid, and then coming back with his own kids. The pure surreality of all the magic and light and hope of a totally commodified childhood, juxtaposed with the tedious, annoying, degrading reality of life under late capitalism, including the knowledge of your own childhood's total commodification. Hurry up and wait, like we're all in some man's army, except without the free healthcare, especially if you lose your job first thing in the morning. It's enough to drive anyone into a paranoid fantasy land that's half R-rated remake of Snow White and half Philip K. Dick novel. Though he would have probably said all of this on Mars. Or in a post-apocalyptic future that tries to paper over the more apocalyptic aspects of itself with shiny, happy advertisements and the sheltering arms of massive paternalistic corporations. Oh, wait. Fuck. I don't usually do spoiler alerts, but spoiler alert for a movie I do actually want you to go out and see. The first draft of this review was basically a point-by-point plot breakdown, with my usual rambling tangents sprinkled throughout. But I don't have a British accent, so I can't fool people into thinking I'm smart by just talking a movie at them and making the occasional exasperated sigh, like... Besides, that's some 2013 internet reviewer bullshit, and the world has moved on. We've got to go deeper. So I'll pause while you dig yourself up a copy of this sucker. Ready? Okay. I mentioned Philip K. Dick earlier. Not just because I've felt like we're living in a Philip K. Dick world ever since 2016, nor because it's eventually revealed that the German-accented scientist who lives under Epcot Center is actually a robot in disguise. I mentioned Dick also because Escape from Tomorrow is a better Philip K. Dick movie than all the movies based on his books. Even the best of them rarely have the courage to pull the kind of move he'd pull in Chapter 1 just to mess with his audience. There's a moment where Epcot snaps its moorings and explodes as people watching from minimum safe distance, and safely behind the camera, laugh uproariously like it's the funniest thing they've ever seen. Except no, that was just another one of Jim's hallucinations. Or was it? Maybe he's dead and this whole thing is a hallucination. Obligatory nod to Jacob's ladder. Given how precarious life is in America, even for the traditionally secure middle class, even back in the halcyon days of 2013, losing your job is basically a death sentence. And this whole movie is composed of the nightmares of the middle-class bourgeois dude striver, juxtaposed with, where else, the happiest place on earth registered trademark. The middle-class striver is traditionally suspicious of happiness because they cannot imagine it for themselves. They have lost that power, or given it up, willingly, to any number of corporations for $9.99 a month. Or, how much does a season pass cost at Disney World anyway? Hang on a second. $1,300 a year? Sweet cans and Jesus. Sorry, sticker shock. Where was I? Ah yes, the neurotic fears of the painfully average, bad and bougie, cishet white American dude in the first year of President Obama's second term. They're all on display here, and they all float. The fear that you are infinitely replaceable at the job that's supposed to be a cornerstone of your identity. The fear that you'll ruin your family's last vacation day by telling them about it. That you'll end up ruining it anyway because you didn't pay attention when your English teacher tried to tell you what hubris means. The fear that your family secretly hates you. The fear that your wife won't be able to handle the bad news of your lost job, even though she can probably see through you so easily you might as well be made of glass. The fear that you are made of glass. Or that your sanity is, at any rate. And that, once shattered, it can never be pieced back together. By whom? With what resources? Especially when your supposedly nearest and dearest actually hate you. And Ham, father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and went outside to tell his brethren. Or something. To those cursed with the Protestant work ethic, cursed to be the lowest of slaves, one might say, that's more embarrassing than a house full of condiments with no food. I want to have one final decent day here, Jim says to his wife Emily early on. That's all I ask. Except that's not all he's asking, and we instantly know it. Because the first thing Jim does, as soon as they board the train into the park, is start perving on a couple of French teenage girls. From that moment on, they become his objects of desire. Not at all obscure, because he'll follow them for the rest of the film and drag his son along with him, all the way up to Space Mountain. There's a moment where dad and son seem to decide to perv on Le Jailbait together. But that's from Jim's perspective, isn't it? And he's about as far from a reliable POV character as one can be without being Patrick Bateman. His son will eventually ask, Dad, why are we following those girls? And Jim will have no answer. He'll choose to deflect. What girls? Because the ghost of Sigmund Freud is watching him, and judging him, and he knows it. Just like his wife knows what he was looking at back on the train, though she chooses not to say anything until later. The Freudian way of looking at all this says that Le Jailbait represent both the obvious forbidden libidinal stuff, but also a lost innocence that can never be reclaimed by an adult. Jim chases after it, seeking to possess it, or destroy it, or maybe both. The apparent innocence of youth reminds Jim of all the many and various things he can no longer have. Daughter Sarah represents the childhood innocence that Jim is actually in charge of protecting. Something he will fail at miserably throughout this adventure, to the point where his daughter will wind up getting kidnapped by a wicked witch. Before that, though, after following the French girls around with his son, Jim trades kids with Emily, and then loses their daughter in Jungle Adventure. It's just for a moment, because it's a moment of foreshadowing, but it's enough to stress test the walls of Jim's reality, and they utterly fail. And the filmmakers here manifest every parent's fear. The fear that you are not, in any way, shape, or form, up to the task of protecting this childhood innocence. That a stray object of desire will make you look the wrong way at the wrong time, and lose everything that you should value above all else. At least in theory. In practice, Jem uses a trip to the park nurse for some Bactine and a Band-Aid as an excuse to check out the nurse's tits. The nurse warns him about a cat flu apparently making the rounds, which is weird, because cat flu is actually a thing. But it's more of a placeholder term, used until the vet can run some tests and figure out which of at least 4 diseases your cat actually has. There is some implication that this cat flu may be responsible for all the weird shit Jim's experiencing. But, then again, there's only one constant in all this madness, and it's Disney World itself. Which brings us back to Snow White. As the first Disney film, the one that started all of this, Snow White seems to haunt Jim's journey right from the start. "I don't like the witch," daughter Sarah says, as soon as they get to a statue of her. "No one does," Jim replies, and I initially wrote, "Speak for yourself there, Jimbo." But he contradicts himself as soon as the opportunity arises. As soon as another little boy's mom starts to flirt with him on a park bench, a very romantic track starts creeping into the soundscape, and the camera that is Jim's eye focuses in on her giant jeweled necklace. Yeah, sure. That's what we're looking at here. Then Jim blacks out again and wakes up mid-coitus, tied to this other woman's bed. And this just goes to show you how neurotic the middle-class dude's driver really is. "Oh, it wasn't my fault, honey. She hypnotized me with her tits." Even the avatar of Boomer Dudes himself, William Jefferson Clinton, still uses that lame-ass excuse to this day. Just replace tits with thong. We didn't buy it in 1998, Bill. We don't buy it now. So the other woman with the magic necklace tells Jim that Disney princesses are all, in fact, and on the regular, pimped out to rich Asian businessmen who'll pay thousands for one in costume. This she knows from personal experience, having been a costumed princess back in the day, before, let's just say, something bad happened. Bad things happen everywhere, she says, especially here. She alone references the guy who got his head chopped off on Thunder Mountain during the credits. But she also says she's joking. And of course she's joking. Thanks to the Jeffrey Epstein case, we know that rich businessmen, Asian or otherwise, don't need to go all the way to Disneyland or World for their high-priced courtesans. They can get them relatively cheap, straight from the modeling industry, with a little help from the guy who used to own Victoria's Secret until the hedge fund, probably owned by a bunch of other rich perverts, bought him out. But isn't it funny how what was probably conceived as a transgressive, boundary-pushing element of this psychological horror movie in 2013 makes me, over here in 2020, go, yeah, sounds about right. No, that's not funny at all, but I laugh to keep from screaming. Or I just get drunk, like Jim does, after he flees his afternoon delight. Not that Disney park workers don't have enough shit to put up with, even without being pimped out. The long hours, the low pay, the slow-boiling Florida or Southern California heat, the constantly being pawed by tourists all day, every day. And that is the one criticism I'd make, 3,800 words into this thing. By laser focusing on one dude's mental breakdown, the film avoids systematic critique in favor of casting the whole park as one giant haunted mansion. We started off on the Freudian level, with the conscious mind, but what the fuck did he know, huh? Get out of here, Siggy. Nobody likes you anymore. It's time to sink down to the Jungian level, the unconscious mind, where the archetypes live, and where objective reality is as much of an oxymoron as military intelligence, or the U.S. Department of Justice. It's this place, Emily screams at Jim later on, and it is this place. The whole of the Disney Corporation is haunted by the ghost of one old man's idealized past. And that ghost is in a totally unhealthy, codependent relationship with the spirits of the future. Technological progress, automation, vertically integrated entertainment monopolies, all that good shit. These clashing energies are supposed to produce the magically eternal present that every park and Disney moviegoer is meant to slide into for the duration of their stay. Easy as slipping into the hotel pool. But most hotel pools are full of more chlorine than a World War I trench, and that shit is caustic. But wait, you say. Jim's just having a midlife crisis on the day he lost his job. Except, I'd counter, right before the "it's this place" line, we see a hallucination from Emily's perspective for the first, and probably only, time. One of the French girls pulls a venom face at her for just the barest split second. And is this Emily breaking down from the stress of lugging what amounts to 3 children around Disneyland, one of whom just happens to be old enough to legally drink? Or are the French girls an aspect of Disney World itself? Modern princesses, still much older than most Grimm's fairy tale princesses, most of whom were closer to Sarah's age. Like Benicio del Toro said, it's a machine, partner. Its gears grind on, and if you're caught between them, tough luck. But rest assured, agents of the Disney Matrix will be on hand to clean up after you. One of them eventually lays hands on Elliot, and seems to give him memories of the Buzz Lightyear ride that he didn't actually get to go on in the beginning. And I remember old Uncle Walt used to call his park employees Imagineers. And in the end, another better Jim, with a much hotter wife, only 1 kid, and a much better car, seems to take his much happier family into the hotel. This is the same Jim Dr. Android saw in Real Jim's mind, saying that this was the real you, in a part of your imagination you never thought to use. Only something's not right. No shit, Mr. Roboto. What's not right is, even in its wildest imaginations, frustrated American masculinity can only ever imagine a slightly better version of itself. With a better car, say. Or a hotter wife. Or a job that doesn't fire you while you're on vacation. Assuming this Jim, this better Jim, is actually real, then that means a corporation has harvested Jim's imagination of himself. Just like advertising companies harvest psychological research data in order to figure out how to make car commercials sexier. And now imaginary Jim is incarnate in the world. Much happier and much better adjusted, because he is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Disney Corporation. And then I started to see it everywhere. Everywhere I looked. With a lot of companies. Don't get it twisted. I'm singling out Disney because our subject does. Whole sectors of the economy are designed around getting people to identify with the brands that they consume. There are a lot of corporate people wandering around out there, and that's scarier than all the horror movies in the world, indie or otherwise. Which is probably another reason why this film didn't do as well as I think it should have. I mean, a psychological horror movie about the most deliberately bland protagonist on Earth was never going to do gangbusters. But still, I think it deserves mad props for being an ambitious as hell feature film debut, for being the best Philip K. Dick movie he never wrote, and for capturing a specific breed of madness at a specific time that no longer exists. Tomorrow is here, and there is no escape. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked this video, then hit the like button and the subscribe button. And if you really like this video, then consider supporting the show on Patreon. Much like Mr. Hootie Dean, Detective Steve, The After Movie Diner, and Stu G. Though considering what's going on in the world, you should probably give your money to some manner of medical charity. Buy masks for your healthcare workers. Contribute to the strike fund at your local grocery store. Organize a rent strike in your building. Do basically anything that you can. But also, stay in your homes, wash your hands, and let your friendly neighborhood movie critic entertain you with rambling diatribes. Next time, don't worry. We will officially be back on our bullshit.